admittedly, as it pertains to the elite, and the apparent operations they construct, and their ostensible ability to evade prosecution, I'm impressed. How have they become so powerful? Or perhaps a better question, how did they become so evil? Is power, by its very nature, a requisite to malevolence? I'm not sure. I am sure, however, that when it comes to human trafficking, it's not, as it pertains to America, for example, about Democrat versus Republican, but good versus evil. Too often those of us closest to this subject matter conflate its findings with an interpretation of partisanship. This is a problem, because it jeopardizes our ability to transcend the political and unify under a single banner with the intent to help those who most desperately need it. The following video will be an attempt to prove this point. I'll start with a question. In America, what is the punishment for producing child pornography? Is it 2 years in jail? 5 years? 10 years? The minimum sentence for first-time offenders producing child pornography is 15 years in prison, according to the DOJ. But apparently, if you're a prominent politician, laws protecting children are optional. Republican Congressman Robert Bowman, for the stated crime of having sex with a 16-year-old boy, his charges were dropped after completing a, quote, treatment program. Republican Councilman Keola Childs pled guilty to child molestation, spent 1 year in jail, spread across 12 years, serving 30 days whenever he wanted each year. Republican campaign consultant and activist Tom Shortridge, for the crime of not just having but producing child pornography, he received 3 years probation. Republican Elections Director Kevin Cohn, for the crime of soliciting a 14-year-old girl over the internet, he received 2 years probation. Republican City Councilman Fred C. Smeltzer, Jr., for the crime of raping a 15-year-old girl, he was released after 6 months in prison. Republican Judge Mark Pazuhanik pled no contest to sexually molesting his 10-year-old daughter. He was given 10 years probation. Republican Speaker of the House Dennis Hastert pled guilty to child molestation. Prior to his conviction, Hastert said child molesters should, quote, be put in jail for the rest of their lives. And the judge presiding over Hastert said, quote, nothing is more stunning than having serial child molester and Speaker of the House in the same sentence. Hastert was released from jail after 13 months. Republican Representative Jem Noblack. His daughter claimed he molested her between the ages of 9 and 21. He gave his resignation, and there was no further consequence. Democratic Congressman Fred Richmond, for the crime of soliciting sex from a 16-year-old boy, he was never charged, and after he said he was sorry, he actually won re-election. Democratic Governor Neil Goldschmidt admitted to raping a 13-year-old girl, and the charges were dropped. Democratic Mayor Gary Becker, for the crime of child molestation, possession, and distribution of child pornography, he was released from jail after 3 years. Democratic Mayor Ed Murray, accused by 5 people, including his foster son, of ongoing child sexual abuse, he was allowed to resign without further consequence. And of course, Democratic Congressman Anthony Weiner, Democratic donor and activist and Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, billionaire Democratic donor Jeffrey Epstein, Democratic aide and friend to Hillary Clinton Laura Silsby are among the pantheon of Democratic pedophiles or accused child sex traffickers, given lenient or no sentencing at all in relation to their stated crimes. It's important to remember that these were the only public officials who were actually caught, right? One wonders how many more government people are currently molesting children in secret right now.
Fresh allegations that TV icon Sir Jimmy Savile abused young girls during his career.
In a statement, the BBC said it conducted extensive searches of its files to establish whether there is any record of misconduct.
The BBC is the same organization that, according to their own investigation, knowingly allowed Jimmy Savile, one of Britain's most prolific pedophiles, to sexually abuse children. Even while rumors of his penchant for kids spread, he was knighted in 1990, and just months ago, an independent inquiry reaffirmed that several British officials, quote, actively shielded and covered up child sex abuse for decades. Here are some of the names and occupations of those with evidence of participation in or sympathies to pedophilia among the British establishment. Sir Peter Morrison, former private secretary to Margaret Thatcher. The Daily Telegraph reported allegations that Morrison raped a 14-year-old boy at Elms Guest House in London. Former child social worker Peter Wrighton, who was allowed to continue working after claims he was molesting the children. He established what the Metropolitan Police describe as, quote, a pedophile network. Former Prime Minister Sir Edward Heath, the Conservative politician, was accused of raping and, quote, indecently assaulting 5 boys. Sir Cyril Smith, former MP, abused several children for, quote, perverted amusement. Sir Clement Freud, former MP, was accused by 3 women of sexually abusing them when they were children. British writer Tom O'Carroll, founder of the Pedophile Information Exchange, or PI, a British-funded pedophilia advocacy group seeking to abolish the age of consent. Sir Rhodes Boyson, former MP, was yet another member of the Pedophile Information Exchange and was knighted in 1987. Sir Leon Britton, former MP, objected to a request to ban the Pedophile Information Exchange. Leon Britton was knighted in 1989. Sir Greville Jenner, former MP, who in one instance posed as a carer in a children's home in order to sexually abuse a young boy. Sir Keith Joseph, former MP. According to the Sunday Mirror, Sir Keith Joseph and Sir Rhodes Boyson indulged in sex parties with underage, quote, rent boys. Sir Peter Heyman, former MP, outspoken member of PI, and of course, he was knighted in 1971. Unfortunately, with the exception of Tom O'Carroll, justice will never be served, because the allegations against these high members of British Parliament have only recently been made public, and all of the accused are now dead. The UK's most notorious address is Dolphin Square, home to MPs, senior military, royalty, spies, law enforcement, and other powerful figures. In a dossier presented to Scotland Yard, one victim, named Nick, said he'd be taken there in a chauffeur-driven car and abused by a group of men during parties, saying at one point he witnessed a boy being strangled to death by a Conservative member of Parliament. A similar dossier was given to Margaret Thatcher in 1999. She never mentioned it. I encourage you to share this video with skeptics of this topic. They can vet the information and discover that it's all true. I want these people to know what's going on. The culmination of my research into elite human trafficking has convinced me without question that pedophiles, in large part, manage, own, and run the world. And to think otherwise is misguided. For example, not all sex offenders are pedophiles, right? But it's still true that the majority have committed sexual crimes against children. With that in mind, consider this question. How many sex offenders do you think live in your zip code? The number might surprise you. Now, scale that number up to your city, then your state, then your country, and the number jumps to over 800,000, and this is only in America, and only the offenders who were caught. Forensic psychologist Dr. Michael Cito, an author of Pedophilia and Sexually Offending Against Children, put the prevalence of pedophilia in the general population around 1%. Even if we were to cut that figure in half, 0.5% of the human population is roughly 40 million people. So according to Dr. Cito's research, it's not a conspiracy that among our leaders are pedophiles, but a statistical certainty. Similar to the nepotism and Freemasonry, pedophiles in positions of power would almost certainly have an interest in protecting themselves by recruiting those with similar penchants. Psychologist Dr. Knapp wrote, "The serial killer has the same personality characteristics as the sex offender against children. If psychopathy is a trait of pedophiles, then it follows that among any group of them would exist an approval of and desire for child sex trafficking." But without the means to carry out such an operation, most pedophiles have to facilitate their malevolence online, the content of which is becoming progressively depraved. substantiating the notion that pedophiles do share correlative defects with psychopaths. So when analyzing the world's elite class, the statistical average for the presence of pedophiles in society doesn't suddenly go away. In fact, when factoring in the elite's accrued wealth and resources, which include royalty, intelligence officials, Masonic leaders, banking dynasties, and religious authorities, if they intended to conduct or navigate within existing enterprises of child sex trafficking, they could surely do so. Pedophiles are everywhere, and they don't suddenly disappear when they become powerful. It's up to us to ensure pedophiles stay away from children at all costs. This is why it's so upsetting that we happen to exist in a culture that gives politicians a slap on the wrist or no punishment at all when their depravity is revealed to the world. This has to change. If it were up to me, pedophiles would never be allowed to re-enter civilized society. But it's not up to me. Instead, I'm part of a country whose very leader continues to lay bare his apparent proclivity for small children. I'm not sure what, if anything, can be done about this. I mean, what do we do? I don't know. But I'm not going to stop going after them, in the hopes that someday justice will be done.
So you said you went to break up the relationship, and yet you stayed at that New York mansion several days. I'm wondering how long...
But I was doing a number of other things while I was there.
But you were staying at the house of
Yes.
a convicted sex offender.